So in the past, I have answered the question, could the spin affect the vampires in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure and the Pillarmen? And the conclusion I came to is yes, the spin could affect them. However, I never actually did a proper matchup between a spin user versus the casts of parts 1 and 2, or an individual character within those parts. So with that being the case, I thought I would put one of the greatest spin users, that being Gyro Zeppeli, versus parts 1 and 2, to see how far Gyro could get, if not outright beat both parts. And spoilers, it actually gets pretty contentious here, and I'm not talking about Ultimate Cars. So with that all being said, hello, my name is Metas. Walk with me. So jumping right into it, how strong is Gyro Zeppeli? Well, looking at the three basic categories, that being AP, durability, and speed, I think speed is arguably the easiest to explain here. Not because it's cut and dry and you can get some absolutely insane speed scaling, it's actually because there are a very limited amount of speed feats in Steel Ball Run in specific here, ranging from subsonic plus to maybe at the most highest you could possibly get being relativistic, unless you want to state some stuff with TUS Act 4 versus the world. In specific with Gyro, there has been many cases where Gyro has been a bullet timer, being somewhere in subsonic plus to transonic speeds. The most infamous case here being that against the fight against 11 Man, where Gyro, under fire, picks up Johnny's body before the 11 men fire all the revolvers at Gyro simultaneously. The next highest feat would be Gyro when he was fighting Funny Valentine while he had Love Train activated, as he was able to throw his steel balls so fast that it even outsped Funny Valentine. Then within the same fight was able to actually react to D4C Love Train. You can get a sub-relativistic to relativistic speed scale off of the panels alone, but you can do some link power scaling from the world versus TUS Act 4, applying that speed scaling if it's really egregious to D4C, then D4C to Gyro. So it's exactly not the same and probably is a few steps below that, but that's at the highest it could possibly be at. Moving on to durability and attack potency, this is where it can get funny. Due to the nature of the spin, Gyro doesn't really have AP. Well, he does, but it's a little bit funny. For the most part, he usually manipulates objects and people or living things, disrupting their body's physical form or objects' physical form in order to win. Slowly here, you'll start to realize that Gyro is more of a hacks fighter than an actual physical brawler who exploits weaknesses. But if there was a concrete number you could apply to it, there have been some calcs related to TUS Act 4, who Valentine compares Ball Breaker to, as Act 4 is a greater version of Ball Breaker, but could potentially do the same thing or be at least relativistically in the same area. The feat in question is when Act 4 made a perfect circle in the ground that Valentine was previously on before he left into a different world. This can be calced somewhere in between small building level to city block level. However, previous to this feat, if Lucy was not on Valkyrie while originally fighting Funny Valentine before Act 4 showed up, technically Ball Breaker, an ability slash power up slash stand that's not Gyro's stand but the steel balls' stand, has near infinite to infinite punching power. So yeah, the AP can actually wildly vary here. And since we're talking about Ball Breaker here very briefly, since Ball Breaker is compared to Act 4 and is independent of Gyro, and if we want to use the egregious power scaling between the world versus Act 4, Ball Breaker might have FTL to massively faster than light speeds on a technicality if Ball Breaker is truly comparable to Act 4 in terms of all of his stats. So if you think the wild amount of AP variation is funny, wait till we get to the durability, which I'm going to talk about right now. And spoiler, it's bad, like really, really bad. So Gyro does not have a lot of durability feats, and the ones that we do have are pretty bad. Of course, all the time he does get nicked by bullets. There have been occasions where that happens. On other parts, we've seen Gyro being able to knock down doors, and since durability and AP kind of share the same stat line, as because of course if you're able to output that AP, that should go back into your durability, that being a classic case of power scaling, Gyro varies in between wall level to small building level at best. So when it comes to the overall stats, in AP it's anywhere in between small building level to city block level, at its full power being infinite, durability being in between wall level to small building level, speed being somewhere in between subsonic plus to relativistic, and with Ball Breaker pushing that to FTL to maybe massively faster than light. Pretty okay stats for the most part in terms of the JoJo's universe. However, However, where he lacks in this department, he makes up in terms of abilities and hacks. Now, I have talked about it before in this video, but let's talk about the spin. Bare minimum knowledge you need to know here is that it does basically body manipulation through the golden ratio, thanks to these steel balls, allowing Gyro to basically manipulate most things in nature. Some of the best examples of this are controlling other people's body parts, his own body parts, through the spin on multiple different occasions. The spin also grants a level of access to the body previously unseen, as the spin can even harden the surface of skin to deflect bullets, and in other cases able to repel energy or move energy to a different location. These same ideas can also be applied to inanimate objects, giving Gyro the ability to basically negate any durability and carve into anything. However, it doesn't stop there. The spin was originally made by the Zeppeli family as an execution tool. While we never saw Gyro use any of these crazier execution techniques, it is heavily implied that he knows how to use them, as he is a master of the spin and is only second to his father, who has shown the capability of stopping the human heart in its entirety thanks to the spin. However, the Zeppelis are not just executioners but also surgeons, implying the fact, and basically showing it in later Steel Ball Run, that Gyro is in fact a surgeon, meaning that he has a incredible deep knowledge of how the human body works and can manipulate it to even a higher degree than most spin users, being so skilled in fact that he can actually fight the spin users who use the spin for strictly attacking purposes or going on full offense, not using it for its executioner origins. Gyro Zeppeli is no joke with his ability, and of course it gets buffed through the scan. And yes, we're giving him the scan in this video. The scan is an ability granted by the Holy Corpse of Jesus Christ, giving Gyro even more seeing powers through his steel balls, basically giving him X-ray vision, allowing him to see weaknesses within your body in specific. Thanks to the scan, the spin that Gyro is using now is at a much higher level and is being used much more efficiently, being able to exploit your weaknesses through your body. Where I see this being used is to see where the vampire and hormone energy are coming from, and then through that trying to negate it as much as he possibly can, and then potentially to see where the Pillarman's brains are and try to negate that as well. But of course, this wouldn't be a Gyro video without explaining Ball Breaker. If all else fails and the scan doesn't work, the spin and its basic form doesn't work, and Gyro stats aren't working, if Gyro rides Valkyrie, his horse, in tandem with it while utilizing the golden ratio perfectly, he can enter what is called the golden spin. During this, if he throws his steel balls, the steel balls will generate so much energy that it will manifest a stand, that being Ball Breaker. Ball Breaker has a potential to cause infinite damage, breaking through any barrier to cause some serious punishment. The only downside is this is pretty hard to pull off, and Valkyrie has to be at 100% health for this to be pulled off. But if done, nobody in these parts, except for maybe one character, will not survive. So with that all being said, how does Gyro Zeppeli deal with Phantom Blood and Battle Tendency, the parts that Steel Ball Run is based off of? Here's an announcement in between parts. I have a Patreon now on top of a channel membership where I will be posting exclusive content too. So if you're interested in me and what I want to do past YouTube, consider supporting. Thank you. Up first is of course Phantom Blood, and for this we only need to worry about two characters, because if Gyro can beat both of them, the whole part can be soloed. That being, can Gyro defeat Dio Brando and Jonathan Joestar? And of course this is the late stage versions of Jonathan and Dio. Now Jonathan's scaling puts him around large buildings a city block in terms of AP and durability. Now in terms of speed, it's somewhere in Mach 2 relativistic depending on the scaling you use for certain feats. However, I don't think this matters. Thanks to the spin's inherent nature to manipulate the body and the scan's ability to point out weaknesses, or in this case seeing the high amounts of energy or the odd breathing patterns that hormone users produce, I think Gyro would end up gaining a quick idea of how to defeat Jonathan. The basic idea here would be just to remove all the oxygen from his lungs, causing his hormone to stop working. And since Gyro is a mid to long range fighter, it would be very hard for Jonathan to close the distance. On top of that, Gyro also has the ability to use his steel balls in a very unorthodox way when throwing them, probably causing a lot of confusion on Jonathan's part. Honestly, I just don't see Jonathan beating Gyro even if he has better stats. The spin is broken here, especially when they're fighting hormone users. So for the most part, Jonathan and the rest of the hormone users within part 1 get clapped pretty easily. However though, to give some of the hormone users some grace though, if the gap were to be closed, Gyro could actually end up being heavily damaged here and potentially lose. However, like I said, I do think the hacks, the spin, and the overall mid to long range advantage gives Gyro the win there. However, when it comes to Dio, this is where things get kind of difficult. Dio has some of the same stats as Jonathan, at least within part 1. However, Dio's hacks and abilities being a vampire are far greater than Jonathan's with his Hamon, that being freezing touch, regeneration, his pressurized laser eyes being some of the bigger ones. Not also to mention the way to kill Dio is much harder here than in Jonathan's case, as the only way to kill a vampire without Hamon here is to completely destroy their head, leaving it in pieces. So does Gyro beat Dio here? I do think Gyro can win, but it's going to be infinitely harder than his fight with Jonathan. That's mostly due to Dio's hacks. Close range combat here is not an option for Gyro, because if he does, he will just be instantly frozen and killed. So Gyro really has to play in his favor here, playing far away, trying to do as much damage as possible, trying to find the weakness as fast as he humanly can, which I do think is possible thanks to the scan, because all that vampire energy is coming from the brain. And if all else fails, of course, Gyro can use Ball Breaker here to completely destroy Dio. So all in all, when it comes to Phantom Blood, Gyro isn't really dealing with a hell of a lot here. The only problems being, of course, Jonathan and Dio for the most part, which Gyro does have some difficulty with in up close quarters combat and some hacks on Dio's part, but I do think it is doable for Gyro. However, moving on to battle tendency, things get pretty dicey really quick. Just with the Phantom Blood section, we only really need to scale a few fights here to see where Gyro ends up. And in specific with this, we're gonna have to talk about Wamu. Wamu is arguably the single strongest character other than Ultimate Cars in part 2, only being defeated by Joseph's intelligence. But how does Gyro fare against Wamu? Well, Wamu is a walking brick shithouse, and I'm not joking when I'm saying that here. Wamu is inarguably way stronger than part 1 Dio ever was. Hell, even Cars and AC/DC. Because of that, he should be at least relative to his other Pillarman brethren, scaling him somewhere in between large building level to multi-city block, with speeds being somewhere near FTL. On top of all of that, he has the ability to control the wind. That same wind gave him the powers of invisibility, which might not work here because of the scan, but that's not the point. The point is that wind was able to destroy the inside of a building and outclassed Caesar. Caesar had no right to fight Wamu at this point in time. He was completely outclassed. However, he was pretty close to killing Wamu, thanks to his unorthodox Hamon fighting style. So could this other Zeppeli do the same with the spin? Arguably, maybe. While base Gyro gets completely outclassed by Wamu, Ball Breaker might be his saving hope here. However, like I said previously, it is hard to pull off Ball Breaker here, due to the certain conditions that need to be met to make the golden spin. However, if it is pulled off and does hit Wamu's brain that Scan should be able to see, Gyro could beat him here. Now, I'm not saying this would be an easy fight for Wamu, because even Wamu, thanks to Caesar's unorthodox fighting style, was being caught off guard for a majority of that fight up until the end. So the spin could be annoying here. So on a technicality here, Gyro could win here, but it's not very consistent. And this is where I think he arguably has to stay here. Now, this isn't a bad thing. That means that Gyro can get through Lisa, Caesar, AC/DC, potentially Cars in a regular Pillarman state, by the way, for the most part. The only characters he wouldn't be able to beat would be Joseph, Ultimate Cars, and potentially Wamu, depending on how you see it. The reasons being is Joseph is way too smart, as he was able to fight, well, the Pillarmen who have thousands of years of combat experience underneath their belt, and of course the Ultimate Life Form, which it's the Ultimate Life Form. He scales to part 3 Dio and even higher, so it's like, I can't argue for Gyro at that point. That's too big of a massive gap for Gyro to overcome. Plus, Ball Breaker might not have the whole TUS Act 4 thing of spinning all individual cells into infinity, so it might not be able to kill Ultimate Cars. Now, for the sake of argument, you could potentially say because Joseph is a Hamon user and Gyro could end up explaining the whole Hamon thing again, like he did back in part 1, you could say on like a technicality that Gyro might be like the second strongest here if he was placed into battle tendency, but I feel like there's a whole rock, paper, scissors things going in between Caesar, Wamu, Joseph, and Gyro here, so like at the end of the day, Gyro would be like at least a top 5 strongest characters looking at parts 1 and 2. But if you think the stat differences in part 2 are too big for Gyro to overcome, I would confidently put him right below Caesar, which I think is personally pretty fitting. So with that all being said, like, comment, share, subscribe, consider following me on Patreon and becoming a channel member if you want to support me and my continued journey here on YouTube. Stay hydrated, and I'll see you in the next one.